Dr. Lena Voronova arrived at observation station number 12 after a transport journey that left her physically numb and mentally preoccupied with the unresolved consequences of her previous assignment. Though she tried to maintain a disciplined demeanor, her tense movements revealed a person determined not to repeat past errors that had cost her professional trust. The station, buried beneath a meter of Arctic ice, appeared more like an improvised bunker than an organized research facility. The entrance corridor vibrated faintly with the inconsistent hum of an overworked electrical system. Lena paused to analyze the fluctuations, but the escorting technician hurried her forward, insisting that the rest of the personnel were waiting. His urgency suggested that the station's routine had little tolerance for delays. Lena concealed her irritation, aware that any sign of resistance might revive the reputation that haunted her: meticulous, confrontational, unwilling to comply with superiors unless data supported their orders. Inside, she was introduced to the station structure through actions rather than formalities. Workers shifted crates of frozen soil samples. Guards in heavy gear crossed hallways in tight formations that looked excessive for a research outpost. Equipment operators recalibrated sensors with a haste that contradicted the calm expression they attempted to maintain. Lena watched them long enough to detect the underlying tension they tried to hide. She sensed pressure in the environment, a kind not created by workflow but by prolonged exposure to uncertainty. As soon as she entered the acoustic analysis room, she realized how steeply the team's priorities diverged from standard scientific protocol. The shelves contained poorly labeled cylinders, stacks of damaged reels, and reports with entire sections crossed out. Her predecessor's notes were written in rushed handwriting, skipping details that any acoustic specialist would consider essential. Several entries ended abruptly mid-sentence, leaving no explanation. Lena began by assessing the raw audio archive, expecting to find months of routine environmental recordings. Instead, she uncovered a disorganized sequence of files with multiple deletions and overlapping timestamps. While scanning one set of logs, she noticed that a particular recording labeled as structural shift exhibited human-like rhythmic impacts inconsistent with any mechanical or natural phenomenon listed in the station's reference database. She replayed it repeatedly, analyzing how the sequence distributed weight over the ice. The cadence mimicked a walking pattern, slow steps pressed into a solid surface, but the frequency range confirmed the impacts originated from beneath the ice sheet, not above it. That structural impossibility became her first internal warning, yet she resisted recording her interpretation. She feared that the squad, already cautious around newcomers, would dismiss her conclusion as speculative. She stored the file in a private folder, hiding her growing concern. During her routine field inspection, she was accompanied by Sergeant Petrov, whose controlled posture and clipped instructions signaled his impatience. He maintained an air of authority designed to keep scientific personnel in line, an attitude Lena had confronted before at other stations. They walked along the ice corridor above the buried facility, and Lena knelt to place her hand on the surface to confirm the vibration she detected earlier from the archived logs. A faint, low-frequency pulse reverberated through the ice. The rhythm matched the pattern of the mysterious footsteps. Petrov insisted they move on, claiming that environmental shifts were common. His quickening pace revealed his discomfort, as though he feared that remaining stationary would draw attention. Lena considered arguing, but her memory of conflicts at her last post restrained her. She stood and followed him, keeping her interpretation to herself. Back inside the station, she continued to detect inconsistencies through observation alone. 2 soldiers avoided her questions about external patrols. Their evasive answers hinted at a recent event that had left them unsettled. Whenever she reviewed the structural map of the outpost, someone found a reason to interrupt her and redirect her focus elsewhere. A sense of hidden urgency permeated the team's actions. Lieutenant Aslanov oversaw operations, but his behavior suggested he was working under constraints not described to the rest of the personnel. He monitored Lena's movements more closely than necessary for a newly arrived specialist. When she attempted to cross-check the logs of the last 72 hours, he demanded to know why she needed older data. Lena responded by citing calibration protocol, but the tension in his posture indicated that he did not believe her. Later that night, she isolated a fragment of audio recorded shortly before her arrival. This piece was far more unsettling than the earlier sample. The footsteps grew louder and faster before the recording abruptly ended in a burst of corrupted static. The pattern of the corruption was unusual. Instead of random noise, it aligned with the final 3 impacts, as if the anomaly had interfered directly with the recording equipment. Lena examined the file frame by frame and identified compressional distortions similar to those produced by strong electromagnetic interference. But there were no devices capable of generating such an effect in that section of the ice. The technical contradiction deepened her resolve, but she still refused to report it. Instead, she documented several hypotheses in her personal notebook, hiding it under a panel near her workstation. The next day, she ventured outside to conduct an unsanctioned calibration test. Under the pretext of adjusting field sensors, she placed an acoustic device directly on the ice, generated controlled impacts, and recorded the sound propagation. The results confirmed that the archived footsteps belonged to a human weight mass moving beneath at a depth inconsistent with the natural cavitation of ice layers. The realization that something capable of walking existed below the station unsettled her more than she admitted, and she made a crucial mistake. She deleted the metadata from the sensor to conceal her unauthorized experiment. Her decision stemmed from her fear of repeating past conflicts, but by eliminating data that could have warned the squad, she unintentionally weakened the station's ability to respond to the growing anomaly. Upon returning, she encountered the squad preparing for a perimeter patrol. Their rigid formation and unusually heavy gear suggested that this was not a routine check, despite their official claim. Lena observed how each soldier performed additional equipment tests, double-checking rifles, and communication links with silent precision. Their movements reflected a shared anxiety that none of them acknowledged. As the squad filed out through the airlock, the tension among them lingered like a residue in the corridor. Hours later, when the squad failed to return, the station fell into an anxious silence. Lena checked the time logs and noticed that their last recorded location was disturbingly close to the area where she had conducted her unauthorized test. She attempted to raise them on the radio but received only static. When she accessed the live acoustic feed, she heard the ice shifting again. Slow, heavy footsteps, each one deeper and more resonant than the previous recordings. She measured the impact strength, noting that the weight distribution suggested something larger than an average human. The footsteps stopped abruptly, leaving behind a silence that felt more threatening than any sound. The disappearance of the squad created an immediate operational crisis. Lieutenant Aslanov reviewed their last known coordinates and initiated a partial lockdown. He avoided looking directly at Lena, as if suspecting that her presence was connected to the escalating anomaly. Technicians reinforced the inner corridor doors while guards armed themselves with heavier weapons. The station's atmosphere shifted from tense normalcy to controlled panic. Lena felt the pressure of her earlier choices closing around her. She realized that her silence regarding the footsteps, her deletion of field test data, and her reluctance to confront inconsistencies had contributed to a situation in which 6 personnel were now missing. Yet she still withheld the full truth, fearing that revealing her errors would compromise her already fragile standing. That evening, while reviewing sensor data, she discovered that the anomaly had approached the station directly after the squad vanished. The acoustic signature indicated that the mass beneath the ice paused above the central corridor, as if listening or waiting. Lena considered informing Aslanov, but the memory of his earlier scrutiny held her back. Instead, she began compiling a timeline linking the squad's disappearance to the anomaly's movements. Her analysis revealed that each time the footsteps were recorded, the equipment logged brief electromagnetic distortions, suggesting that the phenomenon possessed capabilities beyond simple physical movement. She realized she needed more evidence before approaching command, evidence that would prove she had not misinterpreted the data. Her determination to confirm the anomaly drove her into a second mistake. She reactivated the external acoustic sensor without authorization, pushing it to a higher sensitivity level that risked exposing the device to environmental damage. As she collected readings, she noticed irregular intervals of silence, gaps in which natural ice noises should have appeared. These silent zones indicated that something was absorbing or dampening the sound waves. The anomaly was not merely moving, it was influencing the environment. The first part ends as Lena, alone in the analysis room, listens to the ice above her respond with a single, heavy impact, one that aligns perfectly with the sequence logged at the moment the squad disappeared. She freezes, realizing that whatever moved beneath the ice has now shifted its attention toward the station's interior. Her earlier decisions have closed off opportunities for early intervention, leaving her with the growing conviction that the anomaly's presence is no longer incidental but directly connected to the team's actions, and to hers. The weight of responsibility settles over her, creating the pressure that will drive every subsequent escalation. The disappearance of the squad forces Dr. Lena Voronova into a position she has tried to avoid since her reassignment. She becomes the only person willing to confront the inconsistencies that everyone else attempts to dismiss. In the hours following the failed patrol, the station operates under a tense makeshift emergency protocol. Lieutenant Aslanov orders all personnel to remain inside unless absolutely necessary, and assigns 2 technicians to monitor the perimeter cameras, even though both men clearly lack the training to interpret environmental distortions. Their uneasy glances toward the monitors reveal that they do not trust what they see, and they trust the blank parts of the feed even less. Lena watches the internal dynamics shift into panic disguised as procedure. No one openly acknowledges the possibility that the anomaly she has been studying is responsible for the loss. Instead, they cling to technical language that masks fear, signal interference, environmental occlusion, atmospheric pressure variation. Lena recognizes these evasions because she used the same ones in her earlier career, attempting to reduce unexplainable events to manageable terminology. Despite the internal lockdown, she continues analyzing the acoustic logs to reconstruct the squad's final moments. Her approach is systematic. She overlays the archived footsteps with the new recordings, mapping the increasing proximity of the anomaly. Through her calculations, she identifies that the entity, or mechanism, if she still forces herself to use neutral terminology, moved far more efficiently beneath the ice than any known natural process could account for. The speed of displacement between 2 recording points contradicts standard ice density models. It traveled in a direct line toward the squad's patrol route before their signals disappeared. The implication is unavoidable. The anomaly did not simply exist beneath the ice, it responded to movement above it. This conclusion, however, triggers a conflict within Lena. If she presents her findings, she risks being blamed for withholding information earlier. If she remains silent, she risks a second disappearance, one that could involve her. Torn between self-preservation and duty, she chooses a compromise that becomes her next mistake. She selectively reports parts of the data to the command terminal but intentionally omits her unauthorized field test and her earliest recordings. In doing so, she attempts to shape the interpretation, pushing the station into acknowledging the anomaly without incriminating herself. But the partial data lacks the full context necessary to trigger a decisive response. Instead, Aslanov interprets the report as a mechanical malfunction of external sensors. He assigns technicians to repair the units, ordering them to exit the station in pairs. Lena tries to intervene indirectly by suggesting the interference might be unstable, but she speaks too vaguely out of fear of revealing her earlier secrecy. Her reluctance leaves room for Aslanov to dismiss the threat. Within minutes, the first pair of technicians suits up for an external repair run. As they exit, Lena remains at the acoustic console, monitoring the lower frequencies with increasing dread. The recordings show faint tremors beneath the ice, similar to shallow breathing patterns, though she refuses to label them as such. She tries to convince herself that she is misinterpreting the waveforms, yet every second she hesitates the technicians move farther from safety. When the tremors abruptly accelerate, she understands that the anomaly is once again moving, and it is moving along the same trajectory as before, directly toward the point where personnel have exited the station. She attempts to issue a warning over the internal communication system, but her voice cracks and the message comes out too cryptic to convey urgency. Her caution transforms into paralysis. The technicians, hearing an unclear alert, assume it refers to equipment irregularities and continue with their assigned task. Lena watches their signals on the monitor until the feed blurs into static and the biometric trackers fade out. Their disappearance, occurring so quickly and without any recorded struggle, confirms what Lena has feared since analyzing the first corrupted logs. Whatever moves beneath the ice is capable of interacting with the surface in ways the station is unprepared for. The loss of the technicians escalates the internal tension. Aslanov demands a full explanation for the corrupted logs, and his insistence grows sharper as he senses Lena withholding information. Yet she continues to protect herself, revealing only enough data to demonstrate that the anomaly is real without admitting her earlier deletion of field test metadata. Her guarded responses infuriate Aslanov, who interprets her caution as sabotage or incompetence. This misinterpretation deepens the fracture between them, leaving the station leader convinced that Lena's presence is destabilizing operations rather than aiding them. Instead of collaborating with her, he assigns another member of the staff, Corporal Evchenko, to supervise her movements. Evchenko, unlike the others, shows open distrust. He monitors Lena closely, making it difficult for her to conduct further and sanctioned research. His presence becomes another form of pressure. She must now navigate both the anomaly outside and the human obstacles inside. Her response is to retreat into analysis. She immerses herself in the data, ignoring meals, sleep, and personnel interactions. She replays the corrupted segments repeatedly until she notices a hidden pattern. Each corruption spike has a narrow frequency window that aligns with shifts in temperature beneath the ice. The connection suggests the anomaly generates or manipulates energy fields. But the data also shows something more disturbing. During the technician's disappearance, a short burst of ultra-low frequency resonance passed directly under the station itself. The station did not detect it through normal sensors. Only the acoustic equipment picked it up. This means the anomaly is no longer moving solely beneath open terrain. It is now probing the structural underside of the base. This discovery creates a new conflict within Lena. If the anomaly is analyzing the station, it may be responding to the sensor activity she initiated. Her earlier calibration, the unauthorized testing, and the increased sensitivity may have attracted its attention. The possibility that she unintentionally signaled the station's presence unsettles her more deeply than the disappearances themselves. She stares at the data for long minutes, unable to decide whether to reveal this connection. If she admits her role, she risks condemnation. If she hides it, she risks further escalation. Her indecision becomes the pivot point on which the station's next crisis will turn. Meanwhile, the remaining personnel grow restless. Rumors spread quickly. Some believe the soldiers deserted, others claim the technicians died from exposure, and a few whisper about something living under the ice despite military prohibitions against such speculation. Lena observes the fear manifesting in irrational behaviors. One technician refuses to step near the outer corridor. Another double-checks every hatch, convinced the locks will fail. The internal cohesion of the team begins to crumble. Lena keeps to herself, knowing that her presence exacerbates the tension, yet she cannot escape the reality that she possesses the most information, and is doing the least to unify the station around it. As pressure mounts, Aslanov decides on a new course of action. He orders a full diagnostic check of the external sensors and demands a volunteer team to collect physical eye samples from the perimeter, hoping that tangible evidence will reveal the nature of the anomaly. Lena recognizes the decision as reckless. The earlier disappearances clearly demonstrate that proximity to the anomaly correlates with personnel loss. Yet she remains unable to speak openly, trapped by her own secrecy. She attempts to dissuade Aslanov by suggesting that the interference patterns indicate structural instability in the ice, but once again her vague phrasing dilutes the warning. Aslanov interprets her caution as over-anxious speculation and sends a small team to the surface regardless. This decision becomes the first major irreversible moment. As the new team ascends to the ice sheet, Lena forces herself to monitor the acoustic frequencies in real time. She detects tremors immediately, stronger than before, moving rapidly toward the surface location where the team is stationed. She understands that mere seconds remain before another disappearance occurs. Driven by desperation, she overrides her self-protective instincts and activates an internal alarm code. The sharp mechanical signal reverberates through the base, cutting through the personnel's routines and drawing immediate attention. Aslanov storms into the analysis room demanding an explanation, but Lena ignores him as she studies the rising frequency peaks. The anomaly is nearing the team with accelerating pace, and she finally states her findings clearly, explaining that the entity responds to surface movement and sensor activity. The revelation comes too late. Before Aslanov can process the information, the external team's signals vanish from the monitors. The biometric trackers flatline, and the radio feed collapses into the same pattern static correlated with the earlier disappearances. The consequences fall across the station instantly. The personnel freeze in shock, then erupt into frantic motion. Aslanov curses the loss and turns toward Lena with a mixture of fury and disbelief, convinced that her delayed honesty contributed to the catastrophe. Lena, realizing that she has crossed a point of no return, does not deny it. She silently accepts the responsibility, though internally she wrestles with the fact that her errors were born from fear rather than negligence. The aftermath fractures the station irreparably. Aslanov isolates Lena from the command systems and assigns Ivchenko to shadow her at all times. The rest of the personnel avoid her entirely. She becomes a pariah, someone whose presence is associated with every recent disaster. Yet despite their rejection, she continues to analyze the data, driven by the growing suspicion that the anomaly is adapting. The tremor patterns have changed. They now pause at intervals that correlate with sensor checkpoints. The entity is learning the station structure, and each pause lasts slightly longer than before, as if the anomaly is waiting, observing, or choosing its moment. The part ends with Lena alone in the lower equipment hall, listening to the ice beneath her emit a new type of resonance, one that is neither footsteps nor tremors but a slow, deliberate pulse that aligns perfectly with the station's ventilation cycle, as though the anomaly is synchronizing itself with the structure's rhythms. She realizes with cold clarity that the entity is no longer reacting to personnel movement. It is preparing for something else, something that her earlier silence has allowed it to approach undetected. And now, with the station divided and the chain of command unraveling, she has fewer allies and less time to understand what lies below. The internal fabric of observation station number 12 begins to unravel in the days following the second loss of personnel. The building feels less like a research outpost and more like a fractured bunker occupied by people who have lost faith in procedure, leadership, and one another. Dr. Lena Voronova observes the disintegration from the periphery, forced into isolation after being partially blamed for the earlier disappearances. Her monitored status under Corporal Ivchenko's supervision restricts her physical movement, but it does nothing to limit her analysis. She spends each hour dissecting the acoustic patterns, identifying increasingly frequent shifts beneath the ice. The tremors circulate in slow arcs, pausing at points directly below critical structural supports. Each pause indicates deliberate assessment. Whatever moves below is no longer merely reacting, it is studying. The psychological atmosphere inside the station decays into suspicion and exhaustion. Personnel sleep in short intervals, waking repeatedly to check doors and ventilation grates as if expecting something to infiltrate the structure itself. The remaining technicians cluster together for safety, rarely leaving the central corridor. Their conversations drop to whispers whenever Lena passes, and Ivchenko's constant vigilance amplifies the impression that she is both a liability and a threat. The sharpness of his surveillance reveals a man who expects betrayal and is determined to detect it at the slightest sign. His presence creates pressure that affects every decision Lena makes, turning even routine tasks into tests of restraint. Lieutenant Aslanov attempts to maintain authority, but his control erodes as the personnel observe his inability to protect them. His commands become contradictory. One moment he insists on conserving energy, the next he orders full power to the perimeter lights. His fear manifests through rigid movements and an increasingly short temper. He avoids direct eye contact with Lena, but the few words he directs toward her carry an unspoken accusation. The loss of two teams weighs heavily on him, and the station no longer functions under unified leadership. Instead, smaller alliances form based on proximity, mistrust, and desperation. Every shift brings new tension, and every unexplainable noise sends personnel into alert mode. Lena's isolation intensifies her focus. She recognizes that fear has distorted everyone's perception, but the data she analyzes provides a clarity that the others lack. While the rest of the station operates under the assumption that the anomaly moves unpredictably, Lena identifies a more disturbing pattern. The tremors form cyclical pathways beneath the ice, tracing shapes that resemble crude spirals or loops. These patterns repeat with increasing complexity, as though the anomaly is mapping the subsurface geography. The discovery forces Lena to reassess everything she assumed earlier. The entity's movements are neither random nor reactive. They are methodical. It is constructing an understanding of the terrain, perhaps even attempting to locate weaknesses in the ice or the station structure. The implications point to an escalation far beyond the disappearances. Despite Ivchenko's supervision, Lena uncovers a deeper connection in the data. Each time personnel approach the surface, the anomaly accelerates. The disappearances did not occur because the teams happened to cross its path. The entity increased its activity at the exact moment surface vibrations intensified. Lena compares timelines and identifies a critical detail. The anomaly responded more aggressively when acoustic sensors were active. Her earlier calibration experiments likely created a beacon-like signature. The entity follows vibration, heat fluctuations, and magnetic resonance. It navigates through the ice using sensory modalities the station's equipment cannot fully detect or interpret. Lena understands that the anomaly has become attuned to the station itself. The structure is no longer a protected environment, but a source of stimuli the entity is exploring. As Lena assembles the data, Ivchenko grows more suspicious of her intense focus. He interprets her silence and long hours as evidence of concealed intentions. His posture whenever he enters the analysis room suggests he expects to catch her falsifying logs or sabotaging equipment. This misinterpretation creates a conflict that prevents Lena from accessing several key diagnostic systems. She begins to consider circumventing the access restrictions, aware that doing so risks disciplinary action or worse, but the alternative, remaining blind to the anomaly's full capabilities, poses a greater threat. As internal structure continues to weaken, the risk of operating within incomplete data grows unacceptable. Meanwhile, the station's physical stability begins to decline. Temperature fluctuations increase, forcing technicians to adjust environmental controls repeatedly. At times, the eastern corridor walls emit faint groans, as though pressured from below. These sounds, initially ignored, become more pronounced during periods when the anomaly's tremors intensify. Technicians report unusual pressure pockets beneath storage rooms, and one night the floor in Sector B shifts slightly, enough to knock over a stack of crates. Aslanov attributes this to ice settling, but Lena recognizes the pattern. The anomaly spirals beneath the ice intersect directly with the compromised areas. It is either testing the stability or preparing to exert force. The breakdown of internal order accelerates when a junior technician panics after hearing vibrations near the ventilation shaft. He abandons his post and attempts to barricade himself in a storage room, claiming he can sense something moving inside the walls. The personnel attempt to calm him, but his fear spreads quickly among the team. Several insist they heard scratching or low vibrations near the lower supports. Whether these sounds are real or the result of collective anxiety becomes impossible to determine. Lena notes that none of the reported sounds match her acoustic data, indicating that at least some of the perceived noises are psychological in origin. However, the inability to distinguish between real and imagined threats further destabilizes the group. As fear fractures the personnel, Aslanov becomes increasingly authoritarian. He restricts movement, imposes strict curfews, and demands constant status reports. These measures exhaust the remaining staff, who now function in a continuous state of hypervigilance. Lena sees the effect clearly. The station no longer operates as a coordinated unit but as fragmented factions competing for safety. She attempts to warn Aslanov that such pressure will accelerate the collapse of morale, but he interprets her remarks as criticism rather than analysis. His distrust prevents him from hearing the substance of her observations. During this decline, Lena makes a choice that worsens everything. Unable to access several restricted diagnostic systems, she secretly modifies an auxiliary console in a disused storage alcove. The modifications allow her to tap into low-frequency environmental sensors, bypassing the permissions Ivchenko enforces. She justifies this decision as a necessary step to protect the station, but the unauthorized connection creates a detectable energy fluctuation. The anomaly responds almost immediately. The tremors increase in frequency, and the spirals beneath the structure gain precision. The entity is now honing in on the source of the new energy signature. Lena realizes too late that her attempt to collect more information has broadcast another beacon beneath the ice. The entity's movements accelerate toward the station's northern foundation, where the structural supports are already weakened. Her secret modification does not remain hidden for long. Ivchenko discovers the altered console and confronts her. Though he cannot hear her internal reasoning, his interpretation is predictable. He assumes she is conducting covert research that jeopardizes the station. He reports her to Aslanov, who assigns 2 additional guards to monitor the lower corridors and restricts Lena's access even further. Her attempt to protect the station has now isolated her completely. The personnel view her actions as a threat rather than a warning. She has become a focal point for their fear, and her credibility, already damaged, collapses entirely. The station structure continues to degrade. On the third night after the technician's disappearance, a deep longitudinal crack forms beneath the medical bay. The sound echoes through the station, waking everyone. Some personnel rush toward the central hall, demanding answers. Others blame Lena outright, convinced that her experiments triggered the shift. Aslanov attempts to restore order, but the rising panic overwhelms his authority. The personnel split into two camps, those who believe the entity is directly beneath them and those convinced the threat comes from within. This division paralyzes the station's operations. Essential tasks like generator maintenance and exterior monitoring are neglected as personnel focus solely on self-preservation. Amid the chaos, Lena identifies a hidden layer within the anomaly's movement, a repeating sequence in the tremor cycles that suggests communication or imitation. The entity repeats certain patterns after the station emits specific frequencies, as though mimicking or responding to the signals. This discovery reframes the anomaly not as a predator or natural phenomenon but as something capable of learning, adapting, and possibly seeking entry. The realization forces Lena to confront the magnitude of her earlier mistakes. Her efforts to analyze the anomaly may have taught it how to track the station. Each sensor activation and calibration has provided the entity with information. With the structure deteriorating and personnel unable to function cohesively, Lena attempts to convey her findings to Aslanov one final time. She presents the tremor cycles, the mimicry patterns, and the likelihood that the entity is preparing to breach the ice. Aslanov, however, interprets her explanation as an elaborate attempt to deflect responsibility. He accuses her of manipulating data, believing she is attempting to regain influence after causing the earlier disappearances. His refusal to listen marks the breaking point in their relationship. Lena realizes that the chain of command has collapsed, and she can no longer rely on authority to manage the crisis. As tensions escalate, Lena observes signs of impending betrayal. Two personnel whisper among themselves, glancing between Lena and the emergency escape hatch. Their posture indicates a plan forming, either to remove her from the station or to abandon her entirely. Ivchenko's behavior also shifts. He begins checking the locks on her quarters more frequently, as though considering confinement. Lena senses that the station's personnel may soon turn on her, driven by desperation and the belief that eliminating her will restore control. The fear within the station has reached a point where human threat rivals the external one beneath the ice. The part ends with a structural failure in the northern corridor. A deep resonance pulse shakes the station, followed by a series of sharp impacts beneath the floor. The anomaly has reached the substructure. Personnel rush to seal off the corridor, but the metal plating buckles under pressure. Lena stands in the center of the analysis room, watching the tremors align perfectly with the sequence she documented earlier. The entity is no longer testing the structure, it is initiating contact. Surrounded by a team unraveling from fear and suspicion, Lena realizes that the next phase will force a direct confrontation with whatever lies beneath the ice, and the internal collapse of the station may destroy them before the anomaly even reaches the surface. The structural failure in the northern corridor changes the station's atmosphere from fear to inevitability. Personnel who once clung to the illusion of stability now accept that observation station number 12 is transitioning from a closed environment to a compromised one. The alarm systems, already unreliable due to rising power fluctuations, trigger intermittently. Their erratic pulses reflect the building's internal deterioration rather than any organized threat response. The metal plating along the corridor floor continues to bow under pressure from below, forming shallow depressions that deepen each hour. Dr. Lena Voronova navigates the shifting environment with increasing clarity. The crisis strips away distractions, forcing her to focus solely on pattern recognition. She charts each tremor, maps each structural change, and aligns them with the anomaly's cyclical movements. Her earlier discovery, that the entity imitates or responds to station-generated frequencies, gains new significance. The pressure pulses beneath the northern foundation correspond almost exactly to one of the sequences she recorded during a calibration test 2 days earlier. The anomaly is not merely approaching, it is returning a signal. Its breach attempts follow the rhythm the station itself broadcasted. Lieutenant Aslanov refuses to accept this interpretation. He interprets the pattern matching as coincidence and continues to treat the event as an unpredictable subsurface collapse. His command structure collapses further as personnel challenge his decisions, questioning whether evacuation or defensive measures should take priority. Aslanov insists on sealing the northern corridor, but the materials at their disposal are insufficient. Emergency bulkheads can only withstand lateral pressure, not the upward force now distorting the flooring. His inability to propose a viable solution weakens his credibility to the point that personnel obey him out of habit rather than trust. Corporal Ivchenko intensifies his monitoring of Lena, convinced her unauthorized modifications remain a threat. He follows her through the station, watching her movements with sharp calculation, interpreting each glance at a console or structural support as evidence of hidden intent. Lena recognizes the severity of the situation. She is trapped between two advancing forces. Outside, the anomaly's approach becomes more deliberate, more synchronized with her earlier signals. Inside, the personnel's psychological stability disintegrates, transforming them into potential adversaries. The crisis no longer feels external. It is embedded in every human decision within the station. Environmental instability spreads beyond the northern corridor. The ice beneath the station groans in intervals, each sound accompanied by subtle shifts in temperature. Condensation forms in unusual patches, creating trails along the metal walls that imply uneven pressure distribution from below. In the storage wing, equipment begins sliding slowly across the slightly angled floor, revealing that the station's foundation is tilting. The internal lighting flickers at irregular frequencies, producing strobing patterns that disorient personnel. The combined sensory distortion exacerbates paranoia. Some staff insist the lights flicker in response to vibrations beneath the ice. Others claim the pulses match their own heartbeats. Lena isolates herself in the analysis room and overlays the tremor cycles with the station's power fluctuations. The alignment is undeniable. The anomaly's movements have become synchronized to the electrical patterns, using them as navigational cues. When the northern corridor collapsed earlier, the entity had struck precisely at the moment the generator output surged during a heating cycle. The entity is not attacking the structure blindly. It is targeting rhythm, fluctuation, and resonance. Lena deduces that the anomaly's sensory modality extends beyond simple vibration detection. It perceives electrical shifts, mechanical tension, and possibly even electromagnetic pulses emitted by the station's hardware. The implications narrow Lena's options. Shutting down the power would plunge the station into darkness, cut off heat regulation, and risk freezing personnel to death, but maintaining full power will continue broadcasting signals that guide the anomaly directly to the foundation. She presents these findings to Aslanov, but he dismisses them immediately, interpreting her recommendation to reduce generator output as sabotage. His refusal further isolates her, solidifying the wedge between scientific interpretation and the collapsing hierarchy. As the breach attempts intensify, personnel begin forming small defensive groups. Some gather near the central corridor, convinced that staying together offers the best chance of survival. Others retreat to isolated storage rooms, attempting to secure themselves behind whatever equipment they can move. This fragmentation leaves critical areas unmonitored. The western corridor, which houses several key structural supports, goes nearly unobserved for an entire shift. By the time technicians finally inspect it, They discover hairline fractures forming along the floor seams. These fractures match the spiral pattern Lena identified earlier. The anomaly is circling the station's foundation, probing for multiple points of entry. The psychological toll deepens. Personnel sleep in brief intervals, often waking in a panic, convinced they felt pressure beneath their bunks. Some refuse to sleep entirely, sitting upright with tools clutched in their hands. The deprivation skews their perception, causing them to misinterpret harmless sounds as indications of breach. A dropped utensil becomes a sign of a structural crack. A slight temperature shift triggers an argument over whether the anomaly has reached the ventilation ducts. The lack of clarity fuels constant disputes. Meanwhile, Lena discovers a more troubling detail in her data. The anomaly's tremor cycles suggest increasing complexity. The patterns repeat, escalate, then evolve into new sequences that correspond to frequencies the station has never emitted. She realizes the entity is learning from its environment not just passively, but adaptively. It is generating its own cycles, altering them as it maps the ice substrate. The cycles resemble a form of scanning, broad pulses followed by precise, targeted pressure. The entity is refining its search for weak points. Lena concludes that the breach is not a matter of possibility but timing. The breaking point arrives when a secondary collapse occurs near the east maintenance shaft. The floor depresses sharply, forming a concave pocket large enough to swallow a full storage crate. Personnel rush to stabilize the area, but the ice beneath the metal grating fractures again, emitting a low, resonant hum. The vibration feels deliberate, almost controlled. Lena listens closely and identifies an alarming detail. The resonance matches the echo pattern of the station's earlier calibration test. The entity is repeating the frequency precisely, feeding it back through the ice. The breach attempt is no longer physical alone. It is communicative. Aslanov, overwhelmed by the accelerating crisis, orders personnel to gather in the central hall for an emergency briefing. But what was once a place of coordination is now a space defined by fear and division. Half the personnel resist the order, insisting the hall is too close to the structural fault lines. Others argue for immediate evacuation, even though no vehicle can cross the unstable ice field outside. The station splinters further as competing survival strategies clash with one another. Ivchenko positions himself near Lena, his posture tense, expecting conflict. His eyes track every person who approaches her, anticipating confrontation. In the midst of the escalating disorder, Lena notices a new data anomaly, a short sequence of tremors that does not align with any earlier patterns. The rhythm resembles a pulse, slow, steady, and directed. It repeats at long intervals, each cycle slightly stronger than the last. The directional vector points directly beneath the station's central support column. The entity is converging on the core. She understands the implication before anyone else. The structure was designed to distribute weight evenly across multiple supports, but the central column carries the highest load. If compromised, the entire station will shift downward, collapsing in on itself. Lena attempts to warn Aslanov again, but he has reached a point where every recommendation she provides is interpreted as manipulation. His cognitive threshold has collapsed under pressure. His refusal becomes mechanical, detached from logic, driven solely by the need to preserve authority. Lena sees in his rigid posture the final confirmation that no internal decision-making can prevent what is coming. Personnel begin noticing the central tremors as well. Some feel the floor vibrating near the main corridor junction. Others report hearing rhythmic pulses through the ventilation shafts. A technician in the communications wing collapses from shock after claiming he heard something moving beneath the metal plates. Slow, dragging motion, deliberate in pace. Whether the sound was real or imagined no longer matters. The psychological effect destabilizes the group further. Conversations escalate into shouting. Accusations fly across the hall. Someone blames Lena for the central tremors, insisting her unauthorized experiments have called the thing closer. The room fractures into chaos. Ivchenko intervenes, trying to regain control, but even he cannot contain the spiraling panic. Lena observes his posture shift as he watches the personnel's behavior. He realizes that the threat is no longer just beneath the ice. It is inside the station, among the people losing control. His attention oscillates between crowd management and surveillance of Lena, as though unsure which threat he should prioritize. Night cycles lose meaning. The station operates on emergency lighting that casts the interior in a dim, clinical haze. The cold grows sharper within the walls, indicating that the foundation beneath the heating conduits is weakening. Lena senses the anomaly's presence not as a creature but as a structural disturbance, an intelligence pressing upward, searching for resonance points. The patterns beneath the ice grow faster, more deliberate. The station feels like an object under examination. The environment becomes so unstable that Lena begins preparing to relocate her data to a portable drive, anticipating that the station may not remain intact much longer. Her only priority is preserving the record of the anomaly's behavior, knowing that whatever happens next may erase the station entirely. She compresses files, transfers sensor logs, and organizes acoustic cycles into a compact set of essential data points. As she works, a deep harmonic pulse surges through the floor, so strong that the metal desk shifts several centimeters. The lights flicker in a synchronized rhythm, responding to the tremor. Lena recognizes the sequence instantly. The anomaly is aligning itself with the station's electrical grid. The breach is imminent. Personnel rush down the corridors, drawn by the vibration. Some shout warnings. Others flee deeper into the station, searching for places to hide. Aslanov loses all semblance of control, his orders drowned beneath the noise of panicked voices. Ivchenko moves toward the central support column, attempting to assess the damage, but the floor emits another pulse, louder, sharper, percussive. The metal plates rattle violently. Lena steps into the corridor and watches the tremor pattern stabilize into a single, unified sequence. It is the same sequence she recorded during her unauthorized console test. The realization hits with brutal clarity. The anomaly is responding to her signal specifically, isolating it from all other frequencies. The floor beneath the central column buckles. A fracture splits across the metal surface, extending outward in branching lines like an expanding web. Lena feels the station shift under her feet as the anomaly exerts upward pressure. Personnel scream. Tools fall. The emergency lights flicker into darkness, then return with a dim red glow. The part ends at the moment the first section of the metal foundation bends upward, forming a dome-like bulge from pressure beneath the ice, an unmistakable sign that the entity has reached the final barrier. The upward distortion of the central foundation transforms the station from a failing structure into an active collapse zone. The bulge at the core spreads outward in a widening circle, forcing the metal plates to rise, warp, and separate along welded seams. The entire station tilts several degrees, enough for equipment, crates, and loose instruments to slide against the walls. Personnel scramble to find balance, grabbing railings or fix consoles while the vibration from beneath intensifies into a continuous pressure. The entity has reached the final barrier, and its presence radiates through the infrastructure like a deep, rhythmic pulse. Dr. Lena Voronova recognizes that the breach is no longer a prediction or projection. It is a terminal sequence. Her earlier calculations warned that once the anomaly synchronized fully with the station's power grid, the structural integrity would fail within minutes. The current deformation confirms it. She retrieves the portable drive containing all acoustic logs, tremor cycles, and station telemetry, knowing that preserving the data is the only action that holds long-term significance. The others focus on immediate survival, but Lena's mind works along two parallel threads, one dedicated to escaping imminent collapse, and one dedicated to ensuring the anomaly's existence will not vanish with the station itself. The personnel's reactions diverge sharply. Some retreat from the central hall, searching for shelter in the reinforced storage rooms, unaware that the reinforcement was designed for pressure from above, not below. Others cluster near the exterior corridor, hoping to reach the access hatch that leads to the surface, though the ice field beyond has already fractured from the constant vibration. A few remain frozen in place, staring at the rising floor with an expression that hovers between disbelief and resignation. None of them exhibit coordinated thought. The collapse of hierarchy in the previous hours now becomes a fatal weakness. Without leadership, the station functions as a collection of individuals acting on disconnected impulses. Ivchenko, though shaken, retains enough clarity to recognize that remaining at the central column is lethal. He moves away from the expanding bulge and signals for the nearest personnel to follow him, but few react. His effort to maintain order dissolves into a survival instinct that narrows his focus to a single corridor. He glances toward Lena, expecting her to join the retreat, but she remains fixed near the analysis room entrance, examining the deformation with concentrated attention. Ivchenko misinterprets her stillness as paralysis, unaware that she is calculating the pattern of the anomaly's pressure waves. The next tremor strikes more violently than any before it. The central column cracks near its base, producing a sharp metallic snap that echoes through the entire station. The floor jumps upward as the ice beneath it fractures under massive force. A section of the central hall lifts enough to detach from its supports, leaving a gap wide enough for a person to slip into the cavity below. Personnel near the fracture scramble back, stumbling over each other as the metal groans under stress. The lighting system sputters, then stabilizes at a low frequency, pulsing in unison with the pressure waves. Lena studies the pulses and notices a critical detail. The anomaly's pattern has shifted. The steady rhythm has become erratic, punctuated by short bursts of force that resemble searching or probing motion. The entity is testing the structural weaknesses created by the collapse, adjusting its pressure to maximize displacement. This adaptation indicates a higher level of sensory perception than previously theorized. The anomaly is not simply breaching the station, it is assessing it in real time. This realization removes any remaining doubt about the nature of the event. The anomaly is not acting randomly or instinctively. It is interacting with the environment through pattern recognition. The pressure surges again, and the central bulge ruptures. The metal surface tears open along a jagged seam, exposing a narrow fissure filled with compressed ice crystals. Cold air bursts upward through the gap, carrying a faint, low-frequency vibration that resonates within the walls. Personnel scream and scatter, but the structural damage isolates them. Corridors tilt or collapse, cutting off escape routes. The emergency door to the exterior corridor jams from distortion in the frame. Those who attempt to force it open only succeed in bending it further, sealing it shut. Lena moves toward the side corridor that leads to the generator room. She understands that the anomaly synchronization with the electrical grid gives it navigational precision. As long as the generator remains active, the entity will continue to receive a coherent signal. The only viable strategy is to disrupt the power output, forcing the anomaly to lose its locational accuracy. The risk is obvious. Shutting down the generator will eliminate heat, lighting, and environmental controls. But the station is already beyond functional survival. Disabling the generator will not save the personnel, but it may destabilize the anomaly's progression long enough to create a barrier of uncertainty, an interruption in rhythm that might slow or redirect its movements. Ivchenko notices her heading down the corridor and follows with suspicion. His earlier fixation on Lena has not disappeared, but it is transformed under the weight of the crisis. He now interprets her action not as sabotage but as the only available strategy with measurable impact. He joins her, navigating the tilting hallway as the floor shifts beneath their feet. The temperature drops sharply as they approach the generator room. Condensation forms on the walls, freezing into thin sheets of frost. The vibrations are stronger here, transmitted through the support beams directly connected to the central foundation. Inside the generator room, the machinery operates with unstable oscillations. The output gauge spikes and dips in rapid succession. The generator emits a deep, resonant hum that matches the anomaly's pulse beneath the ice. Lena stabilizes herself and examines the control panel. The shut-off procedure requires a manual override that will likely trigger a fail-safe sequence. With the structural instability, the fail-safe may malfunction, but she has no other choice. She initiates the override, expecting resistance from Ivchenko, but he hesitates only briefly before assisting her. His cooperation signals a shift. Survival instincts have realigned with the necessity of immediate action. The generator responds with violent shuddering, then powers down in a sequence of flickering light and deep mechanical groans. As the machinery winds to a halt, the station plunges into near darkness. The only illumination comes from emergency strips along the floor, dim and flickering. The anomaly's synchronized pulses abruptly distort, losing rhythm. The pressure beneath the station becomes erratic, as though the entity is adjusting to the loss of coherent guidance. For a moment, the vibrations weaken. The deformation slows. The upward pressure pauses. Lena and Ivchenko exchange a glance, both aware that the shutdown has disrupted the anomaly's coordination. But relief lasts only seconds. The entity responds by increasing its force output randomly, hammering the ice substrate with unfocused pressure. The unpredictability of the impact accelerates structural collapse. The station does not stabilize, it deteriorates faster. The central corridor ruptures fully. A section of the hallway shears away and collapses into the cavity below. Several personnel lose their footing and slide toward the opening before the floor beneath them dissolves into fragmented metal. Their cries are cut short as the debris falls into the darkness below. The scale of the breach expands rapidly. The anomaly's upward pressure widens the cavity, forcing entire support beams to bend or snap. The building's tilt increases until movement becomes difficult and disorienting. Lena realizes that evacuation is no longer possible. The exterior hatch is sealed by pressure, and the surrounding ice field is unstable. The only remaining objective is preservation of the data. Even if she does not survive, the anomaly's documentation must. She secures the portable drive inside the inner lining of her coat and moves toward the comms wing, hoping the antenna remains functional enough to transmit a partial data burst before the structure collapses. Ivchenko follows, but his movement becomes impaired as the corridor slopes downward at a dangerous angle. The noise of the structural collapse masks his steps, and when the floor buckles sharply, he is thrown against the wall. Lena reaches the communications room while Ivchenko struggles to regain balance. The generator's shutdown has severed power to most systems, but emergency reserves maintain partial function in the antenna relay. The signal strength fluctuates, but Lena manages to activate a low-bandwidth transmission channel. She uploads the compressed data package. The progress indicator advances slowly, disrupted by constant interference. Outside the comms room, the metal structure screams under pressure as the anomaly pushes upward. The rupture expands toward the northern wing, tearing through the corridor supports. The communication console flickers. The data transmission reaches halfway before stalling. Lena watches the indicator, knowing she may only transmit fragments. She attempts to resend the missing portion, but the console loses power as another tremor hits. Ivchenko reaches the doorway and signals her to evacuate, but Lena remains fixed at the console. The station tilts further, and the floor behind him collapses, creating a widening gap that cuts off any retreat. The anomaly's pressure rises to a final peak. The central cavity expands violently, sending a shockwave through the remaining structure. The comms wing groans as beams detach from the foundation. The ceiling begins to buckle. Lena triggers one final emergency broadcast, a short burst containing the most critical acoustic sequence, the precise pattern that the anomaly repeated before breaching. She understands that even if the data package remains incomplete, this one sequence may provide enough evidence for future investigators to understand the nature of the threat. The shockwave reaches the comms room. The floor tilts sharply, throwing Lena toward the console. The ceiling collapses above her, filling the room with falling debris. The final structural supports fail. The communication antenna snaps free from the roof and descends into the widening breach. The station folds inward as the foundation disappears beneath it. The collapse swallows observation station number 12 entirely, leaving only a fractured field of ice above the cavity. The vibrations stop abruptly. The anomaly's pressure dissipates, not because it has been neutralized, but because the object of its interaction, the station structure, no longer exists. In the days that follow, the transmission Lena sent reaches an outlying monitoring post, but the message contains only fragments, a compressed audio cycle, incomplete logs, and a timestamp marking the station's final minutes. No bodies are recovered. The ice field remains unstable, preventing close investigation. Official reports conclude structural collapse due to subsurface pressure. But the acoustic sequence Lena sent becomes a point of analysis. Researchers detect rhythm patterns that align with no known geological activity. The sequence suggests intentional movement beneath the ice, movement that does not match seismic data. The fragment becomes the only trace of observation station number 12's final hours. The anomaly remains unclassified. The cause of the collapse remains disputed. The ice field remains sealed. And beneath the surface, faint tremor cycles continue at long intervals, following a pattern that matches the final transmission.